This week, the Aurora Theater Trial went into its final phase after a verdict in Phase 2, based on the defendant's mental health, was reached in less than 3 hours. In the final phase, victims and family members testified and final arguments were made on Thursday. The jury deliberates as we speak right now, so as we talk on Friday at noon, we don't know if anything's going to be done between now and the broadcast, but hopefully we'll know about that soon. David, you're our attorney at the table. Were you surprised at the length of time that Phase 2 took? And exactly what does that mean between Phase 2 and Phase 3?
Well, Phase 1 was, do you find aggravating factors? Yes, a whole bunch of them. Phase 2 is, now let's look at the mitigating factors and now make a decision, do the mitigators outweigh the aggravators? The mitigators are that the criminal was raised by a loving family, had friends earlier in life who still care about him, is not a career criminal. Those are mitigators, maybe, but those don't seem to outweigh the enormous aggravating factors. And now we're in Phase 3, is what are you going to do about that, which is now for the first time the jury is not just making factual findings, but exercising its own judgment. They're the only people, none of us at the table watched the whole thing live for every minute. They did. And I think it's the genius of our American system that they, representing the community with their collective judgment, their ability to deliberate together and learn from each other, will make the decision. So I'll defer to what they decide. One thing they won't be taken into consideration, because they can't. You can't hold a person's decision not to testify against them. But legally, outside of the case, it's interesting that the criminal never took the opportunity to speak, including at this final phase. The Tucson murderer in court spoke, and this is part of a plea agreement of life in prison, by which he said, I was mentally ill when I did it, I'm still mentally ill, but less so. However, I'm now at a point where I do understand what I did was really wrong and I deeply regret it. If I were a defense attorney, I'd want my client to be able to say something like that. The fact that he didn't, I might infer, suggests that he doesn't think that he still believes in that theory of how he gained value for his own life by taking away the lives of other people, which is really the same theory. Details can vary, but it's the same theory that most premeditated murderers use.
Eric, what about this week has struck you as poignant? I mean, the 3 hours to deliberate Phase 2, any of the testimony we've heard, take your pick.
Well, there was wrenching testimony. As we sit here, as you point out, at noon today, there'll be a verdict coming down or a decision in terms of the penalty phase, whether it's in the coming hours or in the coming days, and I'm not going to guess what that will be. But if it is that Mr. Holmes receives the death penalty, and I think there's substantial odds that perhaps that's the way it goes, I've been thinking and trying to put myself in the future. It's now 2015. So let's jump ahead 20 years or 25 years to when this penalty might actually get carried out. And all of a sudden it's 2035 or 2038 or 2040, and who knows what the world looks like. I do not see any scenario where this state, for better or for worse, and you can argue the merits, has a death penalty at that point in time, where the country perhaps has a death penalty at that point in time. Perhaps the governor then is, Governor Teddy Hickenlooper, and who knows what, even if we had a death penalty, what decision he would reach on it. I'm not sure I would sell a life insurance policy to James Holmes, even if he is sentenced to death. But it's not because I ever see him strapped to a gurney. It's because I see him perhaps at risk with the rest of the prison population. But my gut tells me no matter what the sentence is, that James Holmes will probably live to a fairly old age behind the bars of some Colorado state prison.
Natasha, do you think if there is to be a more community conversation about the death penalty, does it happen after this decision? Does it have to finally, when the jurors give their decision, does it happen after that? Or has it needed to happen up to this point? Because once the decision comes down, people tend to forget about, as big of an issue this is, people tend to, once it's off the front page, people tend to forget about it. What do you think?
They do tend to forget about it, and I think it is a conversation that we should have been having and then do need to have. I also think there's a maybe more important conversation that needs to happen, and that's a question of mental health and destigmatizing mental illness in our communities. That conversation has been stalled and complicated by this trial, and I'm interested to see with the conclusion of the trial if we can start moving forward and talking about mental health and mental illness in a different way that allows us to look at programs and funding and services that can truly help a population that has almost nothing to do, very, very slim connections to what happened in Aurora. I mean, in particular, we know this, 1 in 4 people in America will suffer from the spectrum of mental illness, whether that's depression to schizophrenia, in their lifetimes. This is not a small problem. We need to have serious discussions about those, and this seems like a good time to say, all right, closing the book on what happened there, let's start to have a candid conversation.
Patty, in the meantime of this very high-profile national case that we've been following, a case came and almost was done with the Farrow murderers. That murder may go. That accused murder may be found guilty and go to the death penalty as well. Seems like we have plenty to talk about when it comes to capital punishment. Do you think the conversation is going to happen?
Yes, the conversation will definitely happen because the Dexter Lewis jury is out right now in Denver. Denver has not had a death penalty case in a long time, as opposed to Arapahoe County. And I think no matter what the decision is made there, there's going to be a lot of discussion in Denver, and clearly there's going to be discussion in the case of James Holmes, because even if the decision is to put him to death, he is going to be here for a very long time. We are still talking about Nathan Dunlap, and even before Governor Hickenlooper decided to kick the can down the road on that, the wounds were still open. The discussion hasn't happened, and I think it's time for the state to really talk about the death penalty, how we feel about it, how we feel about mental health issues, and where we're going from here.